Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really digging into a piece of military hardware that tells a bigger story. The Japanese Type 95 Hego light tank.
That's right.
Our mission here is to explore how this tank, which its crews, really believed was top of the line, went from these huge successes early on to being, frankly, a death trap later in World War II.
It's quite a dramatic arc.
Yeah.
And that initial confidence, it was totally understandable at the time.
How so?
Well, when the Hego first appeared in places like Malaya, the Philippines,
Yeah.
it just steamrolled everything. It had, quote, crushed every enemy.
Yeah.
The crews felt they were in the best tank in the world.
Because they were facing enemies without serious anti-tank weapons.
Exactly. But that feeling of invincibility, it was built on shaky foundations.
And that brings us to the real hook for today's deep dive. Saipan, 1944. That's where the shocking truth came out. We're going to unpack how U.S. Marines figured out they could knock out these tanks with, well, just their standard heavy machine guns.
A standard infantry weapon. Imagine the shock for the crews inside. It completely upended their understanding of armored warfare.
Let's rewind a bit first. Talk about the design itself. Why did Japan build the Hego in the first place? Back in, 1933?
Right, 1933. The context is key. The Imperial Army had the Type 89 tank, but it was slow. Painfully slow, like 15 miles per hour max.
Barely faster than walking infantry.
Pretty much. So the new requirement was speed, mobility. They needed a tank that could actually keep pace with their motorized infantry units, aiming for something like 40 kilometers per hour.
Okay, so speed's the number one goal. What did that mean for the rest of the design? You can't just make something fast without trade-offs.
Absolutely. To get that speed, weight was the enemy. So the specs were strict. Around 7 tons, a relatively small 37mm main gun, and this is crucial armor that was only designed to stop rifle bullets and maybe light machine gun fire, nothing heavier.
They were designing it for the specific enemies they were fighting then, mainly in China.
Precisely. They weren't thinking about facing, heavily armored European-style tanks yet.
And did they hit that speed target?
Oh, yeah. They actually exceeded it, heating up to 45 kilometers per hour, which was pretty impressive for the time. Part of that was down to this innovative suspension system they used.
The bell crank suspension.
That's the one. Later modified to what they called the Manchurian suspension. It wasn't just about speed on roads. It let the tank move quickly over really rough ground, which was perfect for those fast infantry support roles they envisioned.
But again, the trade-off. Armor.
Minimal armor. And the engine choice was interesting, too. They went with a Mitsubishi air-cooled diesel, 120 horsepower.
Diesel was a plus, wasn't it? Less likely to catch fire than gasoline engine.
Right. Less flammable, and the fuel was easier for Japan to get hold of across its expanding empire. So strategically, it made sense. But all this focus on mobility and specific engine tech, it came at a human cost for the crew.
How many crew members? And what was it like inside?
Just 3 men? And cramped doesn't even begin to cover it. The tank itself was tiny. I mean, an average person could stand beside it and look right over the turret.
Wow. And the armor thickness?
Maximum 12 millimeters. That's less than half an inch. On the turret, on the upper hull. Just 12 millimeters.
That is incredibly thin for a tank.
It is. And think about the poor commander. He's alone in that tiny turret.
Doing what exactly?
Everything. He had to command the tank, obviously, but he was also the gunner for the main 37mm gun. He was the loader for that gun. And he had a rear-facing machine gun to operate sometimes.
Wait, loader and gunner and commander while standing?
While standing in a turret that he had to rotate manually with a hand crank.
That's insane. It's not multitasking. It's just an impossible workload under fire.
It really was. And coordination between tanks, forget about it. Maybe one tank in 4 actually had a radio.
So the others are using flags, hand signals.
Pretty much. Flags, visual signals, very basic stuff. And yet, for a while, it worked.
Against opponents in China, Malaya.
Against enemies who just didn't have the means to fight back effectively against tanks, any tanks, really. And this initial success, it bred this really dangerous assumption within the Japanese military that the Hego was fundamentally sound, that it was good enough.
Even though warning signs started appearing pretty early on, right before Pearl Harbor even?
Absolutely. The big one was Khalkhin-Gol in 1939, the border clashes with the Soviet Union.
What happened there?
The Hegos went up against Soviet tanks, specifically the BT-5s and BT-7s.
Which were different.
Very different. The Soviet tanks were also fast, part of their cavalry tank concept, but they had significantly thicker armor and, crucially, much better guns, 45mm cannons.
So, bigger gun, more armor. How did the Hego fare?
Badly. Brutally outmatched.
Yeah.
The Hago's 37mm gun struggled to penetrate the BT tank's armor, even at closer ranges.
But the Soviet 45mm.
It sliced through the Hago's thin 12mm armor easily, often at considerable distance. The Japanese lost dozens of tanks. It was a clear demonstration that the Hago's design philosophy was already obsolete against a modern, industrialized opponent.
So did they learn the lesson? Did they start designing a better tank?
This is the fascinating and tragic part. They didn't really draw the right conclusions. The leadership tended to blame tactics or crew training, not the fundamental flaws in the tank's design.
Why not? Was it just industrial limits? Couldn't they build a bigger tank?
That was certainly part of it. Japan's industry couldn't just pivot to mass-producing much heavier tanks overnight, but there was also a sort of cultural inertia. They were fixated on the successes they'd had in China and Southeast Asia, focusing on that light infantry support role. They kind of ignored the lessons from real tank versus tank fighting.
So they kept building the Hago.
He kept building it right up until 1943, which brings us back to Saipan.
June 1944, a absolutely critical island. Capturing it meant US B-29 bombers could reach Tokyo.
Huge strategic stakes. And the Japanese committed their 9th Tank Regiment to defend the island, equipped primarily with these aging Hagos, maybe some slightly improved Type 97s, but essentially the same vulnerability.
And the Japanese commander, Lieutenant General Saito, decided on a counterattack.
Yes, a major night assault. He knew he had to try and throw the Marines back into the sea quickly.
Yeah.
So in the pre-dawn hours of June 17th, he sent his tanks forward towards the lines of the U.S. 2nd Marine Division.
Okay, this is the moment. The Hago's advancing in the dark. What did the Marines do? Did they have anti-tank guns ready?
They had some, yes, like 37mm anti-tank guns and bazookas, but what proved devastatingly effective was something much more common.
Which was?
The standard Browning M2 heavy machine gun, the .50 cal.
Just the heavy machine gun, usually used against aircraft or light vehicles.
Exactly. The Marines just opened up with their 50s.
It worked against tank armor.
It worked terrifyingly well. Let's look at the numbers, the basic physics here.
Okay.
A standard .50 caliber armor-piercing round, the M2 AP round, could penetrate about 23 millimeters of face-hardened steel armor at 200 meters. Remember, face-hardened means the surface is very hard, but the metal behind it can be brittle.
Right, 23 millimeters penetration capability, and the Hago's maximum armor.
12 millimeters.
Less than half what the bullet could penetrate.
Less than half. At typical combat ranges, especially the closer ranges in that night attack, the .50 cal rounds weren't just punching through the Hago's armor.
They were going straight through.
Cleanly. Decisively. There are accounts from Marines describing rounds going in one side and out the other.
Oh my God. Inside that tiny, cramped hole with 3 crew members.
There was nowhere to go. Rounds hitting the engine, fuel tanks ricocheting inside, hitting the crew. It was slaughter.
What was the reaction from the Japanese side? They must have been stunned.
Profound shock. Captured Japanese officers just couldn't believe it. Their reports back actually suggested the Americans must have some kind of new secret weapon or a special type of ammunition.
They couldn't accept that a machine gun had defeated their tank.
It fundamentally broke their understanding of armored warfare. The whole point of a tank is that the armor protects the crew from infantry weapons. And here, the standard heavy infantry weapon was destroying them. That basic premise was just gone.
This Saipan incident, it wasn't just a tactical failure then. It really highlighted a much bigger issue.
Absolutely. It was a symptom of this enormous industrial gap between Japan and the United States, a gap Japan just couldn't overcome.
Let's compare the Hago directly with its main American opponent, the M4 Sherman, which the Marines were using on Saipan.
Okay, yeah. It's not even a fair comparison, really. It shows a whole generational leap in tank design and production philosophy.
Start with the basics. Weight.
Hago, 7.4 tons. The M4A2 Sherman, common variant used by the Marines, 31.8 tons.
Over 4 times heavier. Just the sheer amount of steel.
4 times the material, 4 times the resources, invested primarily in protection and firepower.
And the armor reflects that.
Completely.
Yeah.
Hago's 12mm maximum versus the Sherman's frontal hull armor of 51mm, but is also sloped at 56 degrees. That sloping dramatically increases the effective thickness. It's equivalent to maybe 75mm of flat armor.
So 12 millimeters versus effectively 75 millimeter, that's more than 6 times the protection.
6 times. And then there's the firepower.
Hago's little 37 millimeter gun, aimed and loaded by the overworked commander.
Versus the Sherman's standard 75mm main gun, a much more powerful weapon that could easily destroy a Heigo from well over a mile away.
And the Sherman had other advantages inside, right? Technology, crew layout.
Oh, huge differences. The Sherman had a powered turret traverse. The gunner could track targets quickly just using controls.
Unlike the Heigo commander wrestling with that hand crank.
Exactly. Tracking
Yeah.
anything moving fast in a Heigo under combat stress, almost impossible. Plus, the Sherman had a gun stabilizer for more accurate firing on the move, and it had a 5-man crew.
5, so dedicated roles.
Dedicated commander, dedicated gunner, dedicated loader, driver, co-driver, hull, machine gunner. Everyone could focus on their job. And crucially, every single Sherman had a radio, communication, coordination. It was just vastly superior.
So it wasn't just a better tank in terms of stats, it was a more effective fighting system because of the crew layout and technology.
Absolutely. Better survivability, better lethality, better command and control. It was a different era of armored warfare.
Okay, the quality gap is stark, but let's talk quantity, the production numbers. This is often where wars are truly decided.
And this is where the disparity becomes almost unbelievable. Japan produced, in total, around 2,300 Type 95 Heigos. That's over its entire production run from 1936 to 1943.
2,300 total. They did design better tanks later, didn't they?
Yes, tanks like the Type 3 Chinu were developed, which were much closer to the Sherman in capability. But they were produced in very small numbers, and crucially, they were held back.
Held back for what?
For the final defense of the Japanese home islands. They basically never saw combat against the Allies in significant numbers, so the Heigo remained the most common Japanese tank encountered.
Okay, 2,300 Heigos total. Now, the American numbers for the Sherman.
Prepare yourself. American industrial output was, well, unprecedented. Let's take just one example. The Detroit Tank Arsenal, run by Chrysler.
Okay.
In one single month, December 1942, that one factory produced 97 M4 Sherman tanks.
Whoa, 97 Shermans in 1 month from one factory.
Yep. More tanks in 1 month from one plant than Japan typically produced of all tank types in an entire year.
That scale is just staggering.
And that was just one factory early on. Over the course of the war, American factories churned out a total of 49,234 Sherman tanks.
49,000 compared to 2,300 Heigos.
The production ratio is more than 20 to 1 in favor of the Sherman, just comparing those two models. And remember, the Sherman was qualitatively far superior as well.
It's an insurmountable difference. The war was being won on assembly lines in Detroit, Pittsburgh.
As much as on the battlefields. Logistics, production. That's the foundation of modern warfare. Japan simply couldn't compete at that scale.
Did the Japanese commanders adapt their tactics after the shock of Saipan and realizing how vulnerable their tanks were?
They had to. The realization spread quickly. Sending Heigos out in mobile attacks against American forces, especially Shermans or even just infantry with bazookas and .50 cals, was suicide. They had, quote, no chance in mobile warfare.
So what did they do with them in later battles like Iwo Jima or Okinawa?
Increasingly, they used them as static fortifications. They dig the tanks into the ground, burying the hull up to the turret.
Like a fixed pillbox.
Exactly. Using the turret as a small armored gun emplacement. It was an admission that the tank's mobility was now a liability, not an asset, against American firepower. They were better off using the minimal armor they had in a fixed defensive role.
So wrapping this up, the story of the Type 95 Heigo, it really becomes a symbol, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. A symbol of that massive gap between Japan's wartime ambitions and its actual industrial capacity. What they needed versus what they could realistically produce in field.
And for the U.S. Marines and Army, the lesson from encounters like Saipan was pretty clear, too.
Overwhelming firepower and industrial might make the difference. Technology, numbers, logistics. These were the decisive factors in the Pacific Ground War.
You think about those Japanese tank crews starting the war feeling invincible, then this gradual, awful realization that their equipment wasn't just outmatched, it was fundamentally obsolete.
It's a tragic trajectory. Their bravery, their fighting spirit, which was often fanatical, was ultimately negated by physics in factories half a world away.
So the final thought for you, our listener, to take away from this deep dive on the Heigo, it's perhaps this. Courage is essential in war, spirit matters, but they cannot ultimately overcome a 20 to 1 disadvantage in numbers combined with a massive technological gap.
That's right. The battles on islands like Saipan were incredibly brutal, but the outcome was largely predetermined years before on those factory floors. Industrial capacity, in the end, can be the most powerful weapons system of all.